Who directs the conversation? It's July 26, 2026. Welcome to yes2hellwith.com. Most people believe they're thinking their own thoughts, but they're probably not. Every day someone competes for our attention. The news, social media, politicians, television, they're all competing for the same thing, our minds. Why? Because whoever captures our attention influences everything that follows. Attention becomes conversation. Conversation becomes questions. Questions create presumptions. Presumptions shape reasoning. Reasoning produces conclusion. And then conclusion determines action. And millions of actions become the society in which we live. Think about that. Long before Congress passes a law, long before a judge writes an opinion, long before an officer enforces a statute, society has already been shaped by the conversations occupying the minds of the people. Now consider flock cameras, or license plate readers, or government surveillance in general for that matter. Listen to the conversation taking place in Washington. Senators hold hearings and congressmen make speeches. Committees ask whether there should be limits, whether the data should be retained, whether artificial intelligence should be involved. I find that remarkable. Why? Because where was the conversation 20 years ago? Where was it when the first cameras began appearing? Where was it when cities quietly installed license plate readers? Where was it when surveillance systems expanded one community at a time? Why are they debating the conclusion after the infrastructure is already in place? That alone should cause every American to stop and think. Why are they having this conversation now? Who decided that now is the appropriate time to discuss something that has been unfolding for decades? You see, I don't believe the real conversation is about cameras. The cameras are merely the conclusion. The conversation began years earlier. First, our attention was directed toward fear. And then came the conversation about safety. And then came the question, how can government better protect us? Hidden inside that question was a presumption that government should continually expand its ability to watch peaceful people. And once that presumption was accepted, everything else followed naturally. More cameras, databases, monitoring, and by the time Americans began arguing about where cameras should be placed, they're already debating the conclusion. They're 6 steps too late. Instead of asking how should government use surveillance, a free people should ask a different question. By what authority does government presume the right to monitor peaceful people at all? One question changes the entire conversation. Now imagine a county with a sheriff who understands that principle. The state proposes surveillance cameras, and most counties begin immediately discussing implementation. The sheriff does something different. He asks, "Show me the authority." Notice what just happened. The conversation is no longer about where cameras should be installed. The conversation becomes whether peaceful citizens should be subjected to continuous surveillance in the first place. One man changed the conversation. An entire county begins reasoning from a different foundation. The air becomes clear, and everyone now understands what the real issue is. That's leadership. Not because the sheriff has all the answers, but because he asked the first question instead of listening to the engineered conversation. History has always worked this way. The American colonists did not ultimately argue about whether Parliament should reduce the tax on tea. They asked a more fundamental question. By what authority does Parliament govern us? The issue was no longer tea. The issue became authority. The conversation changed. History changed. The same principle applies today. Government proposes, the media amplifies, the people react. Every day we spend hours discussing subjects someone else selected for us. We believe we're participating. Most of the time, we're just responding. A free people do something different. They choose the conversation. They ask the first question. They examine every presumption before accepting it. Because once someone controls our attention, they often control the conversation. Once they control the conversation, they often control the questions. And once they control those queries, they quietly establish the presumptions. And once they establish them, our conclusions become increasingly predictable. So perhaps the greatest political power isn't the power to pass laws. Perhaps it isn't the power to tax. Perhaps it isn't even the power to enforce. Perhaps the greatest power is the power to decide what a nation thinks about. So before you become consumed by tomorrow's headlines, ask yourself one question. Who chose the subject occupying my mind today? If it wasn't you or me individually, why not? Freedom doesn't begin when government changes. Freedom begins when the people reclaim the conversation, when they choose the questions, when they challenge the presumptions, when they direct the conversation instead of reacting to it. Because whoever directs the conversation ultimately directs society. And as always, may truth reign supreme.